Jaden's eyes were wide open, full of fear. He seemed to have many questions at the last moment. Who was this person in front of him? Did Gerald kill Lincoln? And his death shocked Blood Lotus. Of course, Jaden had no way to verify it. He collapsed to the ground, and his body stiffened soon. Behind him, those armed people took a step back almost at the same time. Their eyes were filled with fear. In Los Angeles, they always followed Gideon and made things hard for others. However, killing people was still too shocking for them. Moreover, Decker was sent to the hospital. Gideon was lying in the hospital with blood all over his face, and it was unknown if he was alive or dead. Jaden was even killed. Everything happened in a flash. They looked at Gerald with much fear. Gerald ignored them. He walked up to Hazel and covered her ears with his hand, not letting her hear what he said next. Send Gideon to the hospital. After he wakes up, he will know what to do next, Gerald said indifferently. Whether Gideon chose to hide the truth or report it to Blood Lotus, Gerald felt that it didn't matter. Gerald wouldn't stop until he beat Blood Lotus. Blood Lotus got involved in the battle 3 years ago. Watchman number 2 and number 7 were Gerald's good friends. After Gerald recovered his memories, though he didn't say anything about the death of Watchman number 7, he was the only one who knew how furious he was. Hearing Gerald's words, no one dared to say anything. They just looked at Gerald in fear. After all, Gerald had killed all their leaders under their noses just now. After Gerald finished speaking, he lowered his head and untied all the ropes on Hazel's body. Hazel's eyes were still closed. Just now, when Gerald covered her ears, her heart began to beat faster, and her face became slightly red. In fact, Hazel was very bold. It could be seen that she often appeared in the bar, but at that moment, Hazel felt something different. Before she could recover from the shock, Hazel felt that she was carried up. Almost subconsciously, she held Gerald's arm tightly, very skilled. Then Gerald's voice sounded in her ear. Hazel opened her eyes and saw Gerald. At this time, Gerald wore a faint smile. He just held Hazel and faced those armed people, walking out step by step. In the internet cafe, no one dared to make a move at that moment. When Gerald approached, they even subconsciously chose ads by Pub Future to take a step back. Just like this, Gerald carried Hazel through the internet cafe and walked out. From beginning to end, Hazel looked at Gerald, and she even began to admire him. Downstairs, Gerald lowered his head, and their eyes met. Hazel suddenly blushed. Calf, calf. Gerald cleared his throat. After Gerald put Hazel down, she looked at him and smiled. I owe you another big favor. Gerald said with a smile, well, how are you going to compensate me? If you choose to marry me, I won't refuse. Of course, I can accept it if you pay me by sex. Hazel was shocked. She did not refuse or agree. Instead, she changed the topic and said, well, you are so powerful. Why did you run away that night? I said that I found an even more powerful opponent at that time and went to deal with him, Gerald said. Hazel subconsciously wanted to retort. Suddenly, she thought of the shattered floor of Audrey's home. Then Hazel looked at Gerald in shock and said, did you break the floor of Audrey's home? Gerald was surprised. Then, he nodded and said, probably. Hazel looked a little unnatural. After a while, she took a deep breath and said, all right, after I deal with the matter of the internet cafe, I will thank you. Where are you going later? I am going back to work, Gerald said. I am now Audrey's assistant. I just saw the distress message you sent to Audrey and came over. Hazel was stunned. She looked at Gerald in shock and said, do you? Gerald said helplessly, you overthought it, and I just divorced. Like Audrey. You're such a great man. That woman actually chose to be with Adriel and divorced you. It's really strange, Hazel looked at Gerald and said. Gerald rubbed his nose and didn't tell Hazel about his memory loss in the past 3 years. I'll drive you to Audrey's and tell her that I'm safe. Hazel took out her car key and unlocked the door beside her. Gerald was surprised. If an ordinary girl was kidnapped and then rescued, even now she would be scared out of her mind. However, Hazel quickly became calm. She has a higher degree of mental health, Gerald licked his lips and said. Maybe I can bring her to the night watch. Every watchman, apart from carrying out missions, would also seek newcomers and bring them to the night watch to train. It was like when Gerald was discovered. Of course, a newcomer must be repeatedly inspected in between. As Hazel drove, she constantly glanced at Gerald. She finally understood why Audrey was so curious about Gerald. It was because Gerald was very mysterious. When they arrived at Forever Group, it was almost lunchtime. They walked into Forever Group. This time, no one stopped Gerald. They successfully entered the elevator. After walking in, Gerald touched his nose and said, "By the way, don't tell Audrey about how I saved you. I often keep a low profile." Hazel looked at Gerald in surprise. She thought about it and found that Gerald was indeed very low-key. If she had not seen it, Hazel would not believe that Gerald was so powerful. After all, Gerald scared dozens of armed people. When they appeared in Audrey's office, Audrey and Bradley were standing together. They were pacing back and forth. Anxiously, Bradley held his phone and made phone calls again and again. At the sight of Hazel, Audrey immediately rushed over and hugged her. "Hazel, are you all right?" "I'm fine. After Gerald came and brought Bradley's message, they let me go. They probably won't find trouble with me again," Hazel said to Audrey. Audrey let out a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, Bradley looked at Gerald. Audrey did not know, but Bradley knew very well that if his message worked, Gideon would not ignore his call. Bradley glanced at Gerald. He knew who Gerald was, so he did not mention anything else. Hazel and Audrey stayed for a while. After lunch, they left. Meanwhile, in the emergency room of Cordale Hospital, the doctor walked out tiredly. He took off his mask, and several people hurriedly surrounded him. "Doctor, is our boss all right?" one of them asked. "He's fine. He just needs to stay in the hospital for a while. He's awake now." "Who is David Field?" the doctor asked. A middle-aged man quickly stood up and replied, "It's me. The patient wants to see you." After that, the doctor walked around them. David hurriedly walked into the ward. Gideon's head was wrapped with gauze. He looked a little weak and was lying on the bed. "Boss." David walked over and asked, "What should we do now?" Right now, Jaden's cops were still in the internet cafe. This time, Gerald killed someone in public and could not deal with it. According to the method of the night watch. Gideon sighed and said weakly, "Take the cops away and find a secret place in the suburbs to bury it. Don't worry, no one will look into it. In addition, tell the others present not to disclose anything about what happened today, unless they want to risk their necks." "All right, I'll do it right now." David hurriedly nodded. "Wait a minute, there's one more thing." Gideon sighed. "Find Hazel, apologize to her, and buy her internet cafe. We really can't afford to offend that person." It seemed to be over. Just like that, Hazel did not mention anything and gave the credit to Bradley. Gideon also warned others not to make it public. In the eyes of those who knew Gerald, he was still who he was, a loser who worked in the construction field and was cheated on by his ex-wife. Surely, a few people knew that Gerald had a logistics company in Los Angeles. And now, Gerald was just Audrey's assistant. After lunch, Audrey had to go back to work. In fact, her work was very easy. She just needed to read some documents and sign them. Audrey would think of ways to assign some tasks to Gerald, like buying coffee and other trivial matters. When Gerald was happy, he would do it, or he would just lie on the sofa and spend time on his phone. Audrey would complain about Gerald and say that she hired a loser, but she would not be angry. If the Blood Lotus didn't want to attack Audrey at any time, Gerald's job would be very easy. Moreover, Gerald could get 5% of the shares of Forever Group. Gerald felt a little bored during the whole afternoon. He sat on the sofa and even felt his butt hurt. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in a suite of the most luxurious hotel near the White Elephant Tower, Red Rose was sitting in front of the window. She wore a translucent red dress with red lips and a glass of wine in her hand. As she looked out of the window at the river view, Red Rose looked very charming. Ring, ring, ring. Red Rose was making a phone call to blue card assassin Jaden. Alas, what a loser. I asked him to help me find prey, but now he dares not answer my phone, Red Rose said with a murderous look. Behind her stood a middle-aged man with a crew cut. Hearing Red Rose's words, he said, with Jaden's rank, he would never Dare not answer your call. Now that he has not answered, I'm afraid there is only one result. He may be in danger. Have you found Lincoln's body? Red Rose asked. Yes, I found it. He was killed, and the killer was much more powerful than Lincoln. The person behind Red Rose said, this means that the killer is likely to be in the top 10 of the Watchmen. Of course, someone else on the killer list might do it. After all, the reward is great in Sin City. Ads by Pub Future. What about Bradley? What did he say? Red Rose asked. He's under control. The target is still Audrey, but at this point, the person behind Red Rose said thoughtfully, during this period, Watchmen have been in Los Angeles. We didn't have a chance to make a move. In addition, that person pondered for a moment and said, a few days ago, 2 people died in Sacramento. They joined in the battle 3 years ago. Now I suspect that it was done by the missing Watchman. No. Oh or no. 2. Red Rose touched her lips with her finger, and the man behind her swallowed his saliva. All right, I won't interfere with Bradley's matter. You can decide on your own. After all, he is not a big shot. Although Lincoln died, you still have 2 red card assassins and 4 blue card assassins. It is not hard for you to avoid the night watch. Red Rose said faintly, the purpose of my visit to Los Angeles this time is to see if I can find anything about the box. The box was taken away by Watchman No. You mean Watchman No may not be dead? The man behind Red Rose changed his expression slightly. And he is still in Los Angeles. The man feared. 3 years ago, that person brought great fear to their organization. He had even caused their leader, Franklin, to not dare to appear until now. At that time, Gerald said that he would behead Franklin. Without confirming Gerald was dead, Franklin did not dare to appear. This was Gerald, who had once made the entire underworld fear. Who knows? Red Rose licked her lips and said, in fact, such a man is worth pursuing. If I can sleep with him, I am afraid that it will be very good. After that, she turned around and said, you can leave now. If there is nothing else, do not disturb me. Also, do not let others know that I've been in Los Angeles. At 4:30 in the afternoon, the door to Audrey's office was pushed open. 2 beautiful women walked inside. They were Doreen and Penny. I'll get off work soon, Audrey said with a smile. Wait a moment. Doreen and Penny saw Gerald. Penny frowned and asked, why are you here? Audrey, didn't I tell you not to deal with Gerald? He was once a rapist. Gerald frowned. He looked up at Penny and said, it's none of your business. HMPH, I just want Audrey to know who you are. Penny sneered. Gerald had no impression of Penny. She should have been a friend Doreen had after Gerald left Sacramento. Audrey saw that something was wrong and hurriedly said, Penny, he is the assistant my dad hired for me, and I feel that he is not bad. Don't worry, Penny hurriedly said, he looks like he has changed himself. Who knows what he is thinking? The rapist will not put the cards on the table. Gerald was displeased by Penny's words. He looked up and said, don't worry. If you get naked in front of me and beg me to sleep with you, I won't touch you. You. Penny blushed and said angrily, how dare you talk to me like that? Do you know who I am? It's none of my business who you are. Gerald curled his lips and said, you. Penny was furious and glared at Gerald. She was ignored by Gerald. Audrey soon changed the topic. By the way, where's Henley? Why didn't he come with you? He went to Fletcher. Doreen also changed the topic and said, Fletcher said that he wanted to buy us a meal. You know, I don't like him very much, so I didn't go over. After that, Doreen looked at Gerald and said, Gerald, I have something to tell you alone. Penny anxiously said, Doreen, don't be alone with this person. Your cousin was harmed by him. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Doreen looked at her. Gerald ignored Penny and followed Doreen outside. When they arrived at a quiet place in the company, Doreen frowned and said, Gerald, you went too far just now. Penny is a DURT. Now, you finally found a good job here. Don't lose it because of a slip of the tongue. With Penny's family background, it is very easy for her father to fire you. After that, Doreen continued, but don't worry. Penny and I have a good relationship. I will comfort her later, and it will be over. Gerald sneered and shrugged indifferently. Seeing Gerald like this, Doreen frowned and said, Gerald, don't be depressed. Although you can't return to the Kenneth's place, you can still live better than many ordinary people here. Since you're back, just be good and behave yourself. Gerald sighed. Obviously, Doreen didn't believe him. She thought that what happened back then was indeed done by him. 9 years had passed, and it had faded away a little. He no longer explained anything. Gerald frowned and said, Did you come to me for this? No, I thought about it when I went back after talking to you that day. Doreen said, Actually, you had a thing for me back then. I could feel it. After all, I'm a girl, and I'm sensitive. Gerald was speechless. At this time, Doreen said, But you have to understand that we can't be together. That day, you said that you could help. I thought about it for a while and felt that I should tell you. Don't meddle in the matter between me and Henley. It's not easy to get out. Don't do anything wrong because of me and be in jail again. Although I'm unwilling to be with Henley, I can live a rich life with him in the future. He also agreed that he wouldn't get involved in my life. Hearing this, Gerald sighed. He could foresee how difficult it was for him to change the opinions of those people. Even though he thought that Doreen had the best relationship with him back then, she still did not believe him. These words were not nice to Gerald, but Doreen had a good starting point. Of course, it also proved that Doreen had some feelings for him, be it friendship or other feelings. Therefore, Gerald did not refute her and just listened quietly. He was already used to people's misunderstandings and did not care about them. Doreen looked at Gerald's calm face and continued, and the third thing, she looked at Gerald and asked, Can you ask the doctor you know to treat my grandfather? Gerald looked at him. Doreen's grandfather was a very outstanding man. His family's business was built himself, and his family became a top family in Sacramento. Gerald had seen her grandfather, but his grandfather had never liked Gerald. Her grandfather felt that Gerald was just a branch family member of the Kenneth family and thus his background was not good enough. So her grandfather didn't want Doreen and Gerald to have a close relationship. Later, after the incident between Gerald and Doreen's cousin, Doreen's grandfather hated Gerald a lot. Dr. Manning has left Los Angeles. I don't know where he went, Gerald said. What he said was the truth, but in Doreen's opinion, it might not be the case. She felt that Gerald held a grudge against his grandfather, so he was unwilling to introduce the doctor to her. She frowned and said, Gerald, it has been 9 years. I have already let it go. Why do you still hold a grudge against my grandfather? Back then, something like that happened to his granddaughter. That was why my grandfather would not let it go. Gerald waved his hand and said, Believe it or not, Drive. Manning has indeed left Los Angeles. He can't come back for the time being. In fact, I know a little about medicine. Although I'm not as good as Dr. Manning and don't know how to do surgery, if you believe me, I can check up on your grandfather when I go to Sacramento. Doreen was stunned. Indeed, a night watch would study simple medical treatment because it was impossible for a night watch to have a top doctor around on every mission. Ads by Pub Future. Doreen frowned. She did not agree or deny it. Instead, she said, You better not go back to Sacramento. My cousin's family will not let you go. And you also know Henley's hostility toward you. You can live well in Los Angeles. At this time, Gerald smiled and looked at Doreen. Even now, you still do not believe that I have been wronged, so I have to go back. My parents are still in Sacramento. Although they have been living well for the past 9 years, they probably do not feel good. After all, they have a son with a bad reputation, so I will prove my innocence. All the people who framed me back then will pay the price. Doreen looked at Gerald and sighed. Up to you. In short, try not to provoke Henley. Even if you want to go back, keep a low profile. After that, she turned and walked to Audrey's office. Looking at her slim back, Gerald touched his nose and thought, although you still don't believe that I am innocent, at least in these 3 years, you've been the only one who still looks out for me. In this case, I'll never let someone like Henley get you. Just then, the corner of his eyes flashed with a cold light. Humph. The Zumthor family. In fact, From the information that Doreen had revealed, he could know many things. Doreen's grandfather was seriously ill and was not in the mood for business. As a result, the Cowsey family fell into a passive situation. As for Henley and the others, they probably took the chance to control part of the Cowsey family's businesses. That was why they had no choice but to let Doreen sacrifice herself to marry Henley in order to protect her family business. Gerald let out a breath. At this time, Bradley suddenly walked over and looked at Gerald. He took out a box of cigarettes and handed it to Gerald. He asked, "You want this?" Gerald did not refuse him. He smoked, but he was not addicted. After lighting a cigarette, Bradley let out a sigh and said, "I just confirmed with Gideon. I must thank you for what you did for Hazel." "It's okay." Gerald smiled and said, "Don't spread the news out. As you know, we are low-key." "I understand." Bradley nodded and said, "Just now, I bought the villa next to Audrey's home. If you are free, move in." Gerald looked at him in surprise. He thought, damn it. The green power. He knew Bradley's plan to let Gerald live closer to Audrey. In this case, Gerald could ensure Audrey's safety better. Gerald naturally would not refuse this request. He even planned to have Trevor and Liam move over. Otherwise, it would be too boring to live alone. Bradley looked at Gerald and then said, "Gerald, I have a question. Don't you like Audrey?" Gerald was speechless. Bradley asked the question again. "Is Audrey not beautiful enough?" Bradley asked suspiciously. Gerald shook his head. "That's not true. Audrey is indeed very beautiful. She is the best among the women I have met." "Is it because she has a bad temper?" Bradley asked again. "No," Gerald said, "she has a good temper. She usually treats strangers coldly, but she is easygoing with people she is familiar with. It is quite interesting." "Then why don't you have feelings for her at all?" Bradley sighed and said, "Fletcher has been in love with Audrey for several years. I don't like him. Audrey also hates him. He can't even persuade Audrey to have a meal with him. But you are the closest young man to her in all these years, and she obviously has a good impression of you." Bradley said, "Do you want me to let you get married first? Then you can be closer and fall in love." Gerald was dumbfounded. Bradley was too eager to marry his daughter to him. "Well, Bradley, don't worry about your daughter's marriage. She is so beautiful, and she has a strong backup like. She is rich and beautiful. As long as she wants, there will be countless excellent men in Los Angeles waiting for her." "You love," Gerald said. "Alas." Bradley sighed and took a long puff of smoke. "I am just worried about this. I have never learned that she had a boyfriend. For so many years, she seems to have girls around all the time." Then, he looked at Gerald and whispered to him, "I wonder if she's a lesbian now. Why don't you help me test her? Try to seduce her. You can sleep together and then get married." "Fuck." Gerald looked at him in shock and said, "Bradley, you're crazy." "Ahem. I'm just open-minded. Why don't you think about it?" Bradley looked at Gerald and said, "Anyway, I am quite satisfied with you." Gerald looked at him and smiled strangely. "Then I will think about it." Bradley patted Gerald on the shoulder and said, "Good luck." After that, he put out the cigarette and left the smoking area. Gerald looked at Bradley's back and shook his head. At 5 o'clock, Audrey got off work on time. She took Doreen and Penny and left the company together. Of course, Gerald did not leave directly. He was off work, but all the watchmen in Los Angeles had left. He had to ensure Audrey's safety, so he had been following them in secret. On the way, Penny was trying to persuade Audrey to fire Gerald and cut off Gerald. Audrey just brushed it off. They went shopping, ate some snacks, and returned to their own home. Audrey had 10 bodyguards at home. It was relatively safe. When Audrey returned home, Gerald let out a sigh of relief. He planned to return to the Cherry Garden first and move his luggage over. Gerald called Trevor and told him about the situation. Trevor immediately agreed to his decision. Trevor had lived an economical life. Although he was well paid now, he hadn't gotten used to it. After Gerald sent him the address, he began to pack up his things. Gerald took a taxi to the Cherry Garden. As soon as he arrived at the gate of the Cherry Garden, he frowned. Because Mary was sitting at the door. When she saw Gerald, get out of the car. She quickly stood up and ran over. Gerald was annoyed. The other reason for Gerald to move out of Cherry Garden was that he wanted to completely cut ties with Mary's family. Gerald knew this family too well. Adriel could support them if he and Irene were still together. But Adriel had dumped Irene. Adriel had bought the mother and daughter some precious bags and clothes, but it wasn't much money even if they were sold. The family lost their source of income. Mary didn't want to work. Although Irene was young and had a degree, she had been idle at home for 3 years. She couldn't find a job with a high salary since she had no work experience. Gerald gave them around $3,200 each month in the past, which was much more than women could earn monthly in Glory World. Irene was very lazy. She could not earn $3,200 a month even if she went to work. Therefore, the two of them would come to find Gerald if they wanted to live a charmed life like before. Gerald had bluntly refused them before, but Mary and Irene wouldn't give up that easily. Gerald normally wouldn't show up at Glory World. If Mary and Irene went to Glory World to cause trouble, Tyrone would deal with them. Living in Cherry Garden was different. Now he met Mary. Mary trotted to Gerald. However, Mary did not show off like before, with a face full of disdain. Instead, she said with a polite tone, "Gerald, you are back. I have been waiting for you all day." Before Gerald could speak, she smiled and added, "I made some of your favorite dishes at home. Would you like to come home and have dinner with us? You and Irene were a couple before. We don't have to be hostile even if you're two split up. You bought that house with your money. Irene and I thought about it. We think you should be entitled to ownership too." Gerald sneered inwardly. "You made my favorite dishes. Do you know what I like to eat the most? In the past 3 years, I made dinner for you every day. I have been like a servant." Ads by Pub Future. Gerald frowned and said, "Didn't you tell me not to bother you guys anymore? Now please don't bother me anymore." Then he bypassed Mary and walked forward. Mary was not angry or scolding him. She caught up with Gerald and said, "Gerald, I know that you are angry. I did go too far before. It was all my fault. It had nothing to do with Irene." Gerald stopped and looked at her. "So you were the one who hooked up with Adriel, not Irene. Didn't she cheat on me and dump me once she hooked up with a rich man?" Mary was startled. She knows she was wrong. "Me too. We really regret it. We were blinded. No matter what, Irene's father saved your life. Irene wants to get you back and live a peaceful life with you. Would you remarry?" Gerald snorted. He ignored Mary and continued to walk towards his residence. He had to move to where Audrey lived as soon as possible. "Gerald, how can you be so cruel?" Mary saw that Gerald was still ignoring her. She stomped her feet and said, "You abandon us. Now that you are rich. Our family saved your life." "Unbelievable," Gerald said. "If it weren't for Shelton saving my life, do you think that you could live in that house? Although you are entitled to ownership, I bought it with my money. If we go to court, I can get half of the property. Since it is a shared property, now I don't want the half anymore. I have raised you for 3 years. I have repaid my debts." "Fine." Mary ran to Gerald and blocked his way with her hand. "It's fine if you don't want to remarry Irene. We want half of your company's shares." Mary jerked her head aside and became shrewish. "Otherwise, I will go to your company to pester you every day. Go ahead if you don't mind embarrassing yourself. I don't usually go to the office anyway." Gerald shrugged and said, "If you want to sue me, please do as you please. By the way, it costs a lot to hire a lawyer nowadays. You'd better hire a good one." Then Gerald bypassed Mary and sped up. Mary continued to gabble from behind. Gerald ignored her. Mary couldn't keep up with Gerald. He increased the distance and ran into the elevator. Mary stomped her feet with a long face and returned home. Inside the house, Irene still looked haggard. Vivian had lost her job and was sitting next to her. Seeing Mary return, Irene quickly got up and asked, "How was it? Did you meet Gerald?" "Yes, but he didn't want to remarry," Mary scolded. "This ungrateful bastard. He turns against us now that he is rich." Vivian sighed and said, "Alas, no one expected him to become so rich one day. I lost my job now. It's really unfortunate. Irene, what are you going to do? Do you want to go find a job with me? Irene's expression changed slightly. Irene didn't think what she earned from working was enough to pay for the housing mortgage. Irene gritted her teeth and said, "No, I must find a way to remarry Gerald. At most, I will think of a way to get pregnant with his child first." Gerald returned to his room. He didn't have many things to pack. As he packed his clothes, he frowned and said, "I can't help but get angry looking at these clothes. Mary and Irene were so mean to me in the past 3 years. These clothes were all cheap. None of the summer clothes they bought for Gerald were more than $10. Thinking of the current situation of Irene and Mary, he sneered inwardly. After packing up, he left the room, locked the door, and took a taxi to the villa area where Audrey was. His villa was next to Audrey's home. When he arrived at the door, he looked at Audrey's villa. 2 people were guarding the door of her home while several strong men were guarding inside. Bradley made a lot of effort to protect her. At the door of a villa next to her, Trevor was holding many bags and sitting at the door. He had a cigarette in his mouth as he looked curiously at Audrey's house. Seeing Gerald come over, he hurriedly stood up and said, "Fuck, bro, are you serious? Are we really moving here?" Gerald smiled and said, "Why would I lie to you?" As Gerald said that, he took out his key and opened the door of his villa. Trevor swallowed his saliva and said with a face full of expectation, "Liam will be happy when he is discharged from the hospital and sees a nice house where he'll live in the future." He spoke, he seemed to have thought of something and said, "By the way, Liam's mother came to the hospital today." Gerald frowned and said, "Your ex-wife?" "Not really. We're not officially divorced yet." Trevor sighed. "She didn't show up before Liam had the surgery. I don't know where. She heard that I was rich and came to see Liam." Snobbish women are the same. Don't be soft-hearted when dealing with them, Gerald reminded him. "I understand." Trevor nodded and said, "Let's get in." Gerald narrowed his eyes at that moment. He looked at the entrance of the neighborhood and said, "You get things inside. I have something to deal with." Before Trevor understood what he meant, Gerald had already run toward the entrance of the apartment complex. Orchid Manor, the most expensive compound in Los Angeles, was also the only villa area in Los Angeles. Audrey lived here. Of course, so did Gerald now. At this time, not far from the entrance of the compound, Gerald ran out and looked around. He found that the cars around him were constantly coming and going. He frowned slightly and said, "Did I get it wrong?" Just as he was about to enter the room, he felt a sense of crisis, but after he walked for a while, the sense of crisis disappeared. However, Gerald still chose to run out to take a look. He frowned suspiciously and walked to a place not far from the compound. He bought some kebabs and quietly looked around to see if there was anything wrong. However, he found nothing at all. With the kebabs, Gerald breathed a sigh of relief and walked home. Bradley obviously handled things well. The villa was very clean, and all kinds of things were ready, including bedding. The fridge was also filled with food and drinks. When Gerald went back, Trevor was looking around excitedly. When he saw Gerald running back, he said excitedly, "Oh my. I never thought that I would have the chance to live in such a big and luxurious house in my life." "Stop talking nonsense. Come and eat," Gerald said resignedly. Trevor chuckled. The two of them sat at the table. Gerald looked at Trevor and asked, "By the way, when will Liam be discharged?" The doctor said that it should be around a week. As Trevor said this, he frowned and said, "Now, I'm afraid that woman will cause trouble. Why didn't you divorce her before she ran away?" Gerald frowned and asked. Trevor sighed and said, "At that time, I couldn't bear to do that. I married her at an early age. When I came from the countryside to Los Angeles, I was in my 20s. Then I've just let it be for so many years. And I just can't contact her. It was my fault," Trevor cursed. "This time, after you offered me this job and salary, I really couldn't help but brag to my relatives and friends. I think it has reached her ears. Anyway, you should be careful. Don't give her even a cent, understand?" Gerald said. Trevor nodded. "Okay." At this time, Gerald's phone suddenly rang. He picked up the phone and found that the caller was Kiera. Gerald picked up the phone and said, "Hello, Ems. Bender. On the other side of the phone, Kiera said with a smile, "Don't be so polite. You can call me Kiera." Gerald was speechless. "Alright, what's the matter?" Ads by Pub Future. Kiera nodded and said, "Tomorrow is my birthday. I plan to hold a birthday party and invite some friends and colleagues. Would you like to come for fun?" "Of course," Gerald said with a smile. Then he asked, "Oh right, I am working for Forever Group right now as Audrey's assistant. I may have to ask for her permission." "Don't worry, Audrey and I are close. How can I not invite her to my birthday party?" Kiera said with a smile. Gerald slightly breathed a sigh of relief. Before the people of Red Lotus in Los Angeles were completely dealt with, he had to stay closer to Kiera so as to avoid any accidents. "Then that's it. Tomorrow night, we'll go to Marriott Hotel for dinner and then go to Glory Club," Kiera said. "No problem." Gerald nodded. After hanging up the phone, Gerald muttered to himself. Since it was her birthday, he had to prepare a present for her. Moreover, before he recovered his memory this time, Kiera had indeed helped him a lot. From the beginning, it was she who had brought him into New Bank. If he had not confirmed that he was rich, he would still think that Macy was a liar at that time. Maybe he wouldn't have gone to see Valerie or recovered his memory. Kiera also helped him acquire Vivian's logistics company. Of course, for the current Gerald, this was not a big deal, but for him, back then, this was a huge favor. "I have to prepare the gift well." Gerald let out a sigh of relief. After eating the kebabs, Trevin cleaned up the mess and the two of them returned to their own rooms. After a silent night, Gerald followed her out of the door after confirming that Audrey had gone out the next day. When he arrived at the company, he walked to Audrey's office. Seeing Gerald arrive, Kiera pouted and said, "You don't have to stay in the company today. Come with me." "What are you going to do?" Gerald asked. "Today is Kiera's birthday. I am going to pick a gift for her," Audrey said with a smile. "Didn't she invite you too? Are you planning to go empty-handed?" Gerald was secretly speechless and thought, do you have to skip work to pick a gift? In fact, Audrey did not seem to have much work to do. She spent every day reviewing documents and signing them. Neither was she in charge of any projects. Bradley was the one to make decisions. Gerald nodded. "Fine." Audrey threw the car key to Gerald and said, "Let's go to All Antiques." Gerald was taken aback. He knew about All Antiques. This place was an antique market in Los Angeles. It was even one of the biggest antique markets in the country. This place was also one of the symbols of Los Angeles. Many rich people from other places would come here to buy things. Of course, because it was a tourist place, there were naturally many fake goods. Gerald was not unfamiliar with this place. In the past, he and Trevin would often come to All Antiques to work part-time. Of course, what they did was always some hard work like unloading. Kiera is celebrating her birthday. What are you going to buy at All Antiques? Are you going to buy an antique chamber pot for her? Gerald asked speechlessly. Audrey glared at him and said, "You have no class at all. Kiera likes collecting antiques. My dad has a lot of them, but they are all my dad's precious things. He can't bear to give them away, so I plan to go to All Antiques to see if I can get one for her." Gerald thought and said, "She likes antiques." Audrey nodded and said, "Yes." Gerald nodded thoughtfully and did not say anything else. Soon, the two drove toward All Antiques. All Antiques was a very messy place. There were many large stores, and of course, there were many stands. After Gerald and Audrey parked the car, the two walked into All Antiques and strolled around. Audrey seemed to have reserved a place and then headed straight for a very large antique shop. When they arrived at the entrance of the shop, a middle-aged man wearing gold-rimmed glasses walked up and said, "Oh my, Audrey, there you are." Audrey smiled sweetly and said, "Elliot, I don't know much about antiques. Don't trick me. How can this be? If I trick you, Bradley will definitely eat me alive," the middle-aged man said with a smile. Then he saw Gerald and said in surprise, "Hey, Gerald." Gerald touched his nose. He knew this middle-aged man. He had worked here a few times. Because he was very strong and worked fast, of course, he was easily remembered. The middle-aged man was called Elliot Newell. He had the largest antique shop in all antiques. Of course, Gerald also knew that this kind of person was usually the most cunning. You know each other? Audrey asked in surprise. Yes, Gerald came to work here before. He is very strong. Why are you two together? He asked with a suspicious expression. As far as he knew, Gerald and Audrey were from two different worlds. One was at the bottom of the ladder and the other was from a rich family. Audrey said with a smile, he is working for me now. Elliot was dumbfounded and looked at Gerald in confusion. Audrey did not care about this. She said with a smile, I do not know much about antiques. Elliot, my budget is $50,000 or so. Please pick a few delicate things for me to choose from. There was an uproar all of a sudden. Just as he finished speaking, a loud noise suddenly came from across the street. Gerald looked over and found that there was a commotion in the shop opposite them. Then a group of people started to gather around there. What's happening across the street? Audrey asked suspiciously. Elliot showed a hint of a sneer. I guess some visitors are going to be swindled. Gerald was slightly intrigued. Gerald knew about the shop across the street. This shop was called Treasure Store. It was built 2 years ago. When it was built, Gerald also worked there. Afterward, he also moved things for that store owner. Few times. If Elliot was a profiteer, then the owner of the treasure store was a shameless asshole. Back then, when he worked for the treasure store, one of their workmates was cheated. His workmate accidentally broke a porcelain object, which was clearly a replica, but that workmate had been extorted of $5,000. At that time, Gerald and the others didn't dare to retort despite their anger. Later, they did not dare to work for this shop. Now, according to Elliot, the people of the treasure store often swindled tourists. What happened? Audrey asked in surprise. In our business, there's no return of goods. This means that even if you have bought fake goods, as long as you've paid, then you cannot return the goods, Elliot said, but the people of the treasure store are different. They will make some mistakes and pretend that the customers have damaged things. Then they'll say that the things are very expensive and force the customers to compensate. Audrey frowned and said, how can they do that? This industry is very complicated. Elliot shook his head and said, and because of their appearance, our business has been somewhat affected. Due to them, all antiques' reputation has been worse. Audrey frowned and said, then I must go and take a look. Elliot frowned but did not speak. As the richest man in Los Angeles, Bradley had a high status. If Audrey could give the treasure store a warning, it would be a good thing. Gerald glanced at Elliot and smiled. He knew that Elliot intended to use Audrey. He did not make it clear and followed behind Audrey, squeezing into the crowd. At the door of the treasure store, a mustached middle-aged man was holding a girl's arm and saying with a sneer, lady, this thing is some ancient master artist's authentic work. And you just broke it. He was holding a painting that had been broken into 2 pieces in one hand and grabbing a short-haired girl with the other hand. Beside the girl, there was a woman. Both the girl and the woman were quite beautiful. The middle-aged woman was protective of the girl and said, don't try to sling mud at us. We heard that there was an authentic work of that ancient master artist in this store, so we came here to take a look. However, the painting suddenly fell from the wall and broke into 2 pieces. This has nothing to do with us at all. Ads by Pub Future. This painting is the top treasure of our store. It was fine being hung on the wall for a long time. Yet, it just broke into 2 halves. After you took a look at it, how can your explanation make sense? The mustache man said with a sneer. Gerald frowned. He also knew this man. He was Donovan Cullen, the owner of Treasure Store, who had cheated his friend before. People all called him Exploiter Donovan. Hey, lady, now that the painting is broken, you should just compensate for it. After all, you can afford it. Exactly. Since you broke the painting, of course, you should compensate for it. Several people around began to kick up a fuss. Gerald was aware that these people were definitely hired by Donovan. As they heard these words, the expressions of the girl and the woman both changed a bit. The woman gritted her teeth and seemed to plan to compensate. She took a glance at Donovan and said, how much is it? Not much, $2.4 million, Donovan said. In the crowd, a gasp suddenly sounded. The girl and the woman stared at Donovan. At this time, the woman said, "Okay, I'll pay you $2.4 million. You'd better take it well." Obviously, the woman and the girl were not short of money, nor were they ordinary people. Donovan probably had figured that, so he dared to set up such a trap. He didn't care about the threatening implication of the woman. In all antiques of Los Angeles, outsiders couldn't be a threat to him. At this time, Audrey could not stand this anymore. She was about to rush out. Gerald hurriedly stopped her. Audrey frowned and said, "They are clearly scamming the woman and the girl. Are you gonna stand by and do nothing?" "Hazel is right. You are a coward." Gerald scratched his head and said, "You don't know antiques. Even if you step forward, you can't be of help." Audrey was stunned. At that moment, Gerald smiled at him. "Let me deal with this." "You know about antiques?" Audrey asked in surprise. "Yes, a little." Gerald coughed dryly and walked to the front. He said, "Hey, Mr. Cullen." Donovan looked at Gerald and obviously recognized him. He frowned and said, "What are you doing here?" "I don't have any work here today. Go to other places. I am busy here." Gerald went forward with a smile and said, "Mr. Cullen, I didn't know that we were in the same business." Donovan showed a look of disgust and said, "Who is in the same business as you? You are merely a coolie. Just go away." "Of course, we are." Gerald curled his lips and said, "We are both robbers." Donovan's expression changed slightly, and in the crowd, there was a burst of laughter. "What do you mean? You may get in trouble for what you say. Just get lost." He glared at Gerald, then looked at the woman and her daughter. "You two just pay the money now." The short-haired girl pursed her lips. The woman pulled a long face. She looked at Donovan and then took out her bank card. "Wait." At this time, Gerald raised his hand and said, "Mr. Cullen, you are selling this counterfeit product at the price of $2.4 million. How can you do that? Don't you feel guilty about it?" As he finished speaking, there was an uproar instantly. Donovan's face stiffened too. He stared at Gerald and said, "You are a coolie. How can you know about antiques? This is an authentic work of the ancient master artist for real." When the mother and her daughter heard Gerald's words, they both looked happy. The corner of Gerald's mouth curled into a smile. Then, he stretched out his hand. Before Donovan could react, found that half of the painting in his hand had fallen into Gerald's hand. Then, Gerald took out a lighter from his pocket. "What are you doing?" Donovan's expression suddenly changed. The onlookers were also astonished. They all gasped in shock. Gerald ignored him and suddenly lit the lighter. Then, he placed that half of the painting on the lighter and it instantly burned up. "What's wrong with you?" Audrey was also shocked. She didn't expect that Gerald's solution was to rush up and burn the half of the painting. "Dude, you are finished." Donovan looked at Gerald, his face dark. Gerald sneered and said, "Everyone, please take a deep breath." The surrounding people were stunned for a moment, and then many of them began to breathe. "What are you doing?" Audrey was puzzled. However, at this moment, a knowledgeable person in the crowd said, "As the painting is burned, there is a pungent smell. This proves that the paper of this painting is made of modern fiber materials." The crowd was in an uproar, and Donovan's expression changed. Gerald smiled and said, "That's right, that ancient master artist lived a few centuries ago. Unless he could come to modern times and take the paper back. So this painting is obviously fake." As soon as he finished speaking, Donovan's face turned completely dark. Beside him, the woman stared at Donovan and said, "How dare you trick me?" The onlookers also started to discuss. "I've long heard that the treasure store is bad reputed. There are always customers who are accused of breaking things and have to compensate. Now it seems to be true. I will never buy things from the store." Donovan's face was dark. He gritted his teeth and said, "Back then, I spent $2 million on this painting. I thought it was real. Now it seems that I was also cheated." This was what he said. In this industry, he could indeed say this. And no one could do anything about him. Alas, what a profiteer. "We had better not come to the store anymore. Shame on the treasure store." The onlookers started to criticize Donovan, making his face all dark. He darted a meaningful look at Gerald. Gerald just shrugged indifferently. Then, he ignored the noisy crowd, walked to Audrey, pulled Audrey out of the crowd, and returned to the opposite side of the street. Returning to Elliot's shop, Audrey still said with a shocked look, "Gerald, I didn't expect you to know antiques. How did you see that the thing was fake?" Elliot was also clear about what happened. He looked at Gerald and said, "I thought you were just a strong guy, didn't expect you to know antiques either." "And I." Gerald smiled. He did know a bit about antiques. As a watchman, he had to dabble in all aspects of knowledge. He smiled. Then, he looked at Audrey and said, "Come and choose one first. I have prepared some things here. You can take a look at them and choose whichever you prefer." Elliot looked deeply at Gerald and then said to Audrey. Audrey was still in shock at Gerald exposing Donovan. After hearing Elliot's words, she came back to her senses. Then she looked curiously at Gerald and said, "Then I'll go to choose first." Gerald looked at Elliot and said, "While she is choosing, may I take a look around the store?" Elliot frowned. Although Gerald had exposed Donovan's trick, in his heart, Gerald was still the strong farmer that had come to work for him. However, for the sake of Audrey, he nodded and said, "It doesn't matter if you just take a look around the store casually, but you must not touch the things in the store. If you accidentally break any of the things, I'm afraid that you can't afford to pay for the damage." Gerald smiled and didn't mind what Elliot said. Audrey then followed Elliot to choose one for herself. Since Bradley was Audrey's father, Gerald wasn't worried that Audrey would be cheated. As for himself, Gerald began to take a look around the store. There were many things in the store, including porcelains and jades which were placed on the shelves. Gerald walked around for a while and found that there were real antiques there, but there were also many fake things. Gerald didn't know what he should buy for Kiera. He was not a stingy person. Moreover, he took Kiera's kindness to him in his heart. Just as he was taking a look around, a slightly pleasant voice suddenly sounded in Gerald's ears. "Sir, excuse me." Gerald turned around and found that the mother and daughter who had been blackmailed just now were standing behind him. "Is there anything I can help with?" Gerald asked. Gerald was sure that they were not as simple as they looked, and he could tell this from their accent. At this time, Gerald noticed the huge drawing board on the girl's back. She might have studied painting. Ads by Pub Future. "Thank you for helping us just now. Otherwise, we would really be cheated by that profiteer," the beautiful woman said. "We came here to travel and also give my child a chance to sketch from nature. I'm very interested in antiques, so when I heard that there was an authentic work of that ancient master artist, I quickly came here to have a look. I didn't expect that I would be cheated." Gerald waved his hand and said, "Don't take it to heart. It's not a big deal. I just tried to help. There were so many people at the time, but you were the only one who dared to stand out to help us. Of course, we should thank you properly," the beautiful woman said. Gerald looked at the two of them, and he thought in his heart secretly, "How will they thank me properly?" At this time, the beautiful woman said, "I want to treat you to lunch. Please don't mind it." Gerald was speechless. He found that he thought wrong. He coughed and said, I'm afraid I can't go have lunch with you. I still have things to do all day today." The beautiful woman pondered for a moment and then took out her mobile phone as she said, "Then let me add you as a friend online. When you are free, I'll ask you for lunch again." Gerald didn't refuse her suggestion. He took out his mobile phone and added both the mother and daughter as friends online. At this time, the beautiful woman introduced herself. "By the way, what's your name?" "I'm Jessica Lang. This is my daughter, Daphne Lang." Daphne Lang. It seems that Jessica's a single rich widow. If I can get her appreciation, I won't need to work hard anymore. Many thoughts appeared in Gerald's mind, but he still said with a gentle smile, "I'm Gerald Kenneth." The beautiful woman smiled and said, "Mr. Kenneth, then we'll no longer bother you. When you are free, I will come to meet you again." As she said this, she thought of something and took out a business card from her leather wallet. Then she handed it to Gerald. "By the way, this is my business card. If you can't contact me online, you can call me." Gerald nodded and took the business card. Jessica nodded and left with her daughter. When they left, Gerald raised his hand and looked at the business card carefully. The chairman of Goldson Group, Jessica Lang. No wonder she gave me $2.4 million with no hesitation. She must be quite rich. Gerald was suspicious, but he didn't take it seriously. He put the business card in his pocket and continued to take a look around. After a while, he saw a jade bracelet and said to the shopping guide next to him, "Excuse me, may I take a look at this jade bracelet?" The shopping guide frowned. The things sold here were quite expensive. The jade bracelet that Gerald wanted to take a look at carried a sticker price of $200,000. Besides, she was only responsible for receiving guests. When they really wanted to buy something, the boss would personally talk to the guests. Of course, the shopping guide didn't think that Gerald could afford this jade bracelet. At this time, Audrey and Elliot came over. Audrey had already chosen one thing and bought it. Seeing Gerald talking to the shopping guide over there, they came to Gerald. Elliot also saw the bracelet that Gerald pointed at and frowned. "You have good taste, but this bracelet is quite expensive." What he meant was that Gerald couldn't afford it. In fact, Gerald also felt that this jade bracelet was quite beautiful, so he wanted to have a look at it carefully, and maybe he could buy it for Kiera as a birthday present. "Mr. Newell, since you're running a business here, I think there should be no problem for me to have a look at the jade bracelet," Gerald said. Elliot frowned and looked at Audrey next to him. He frowned and gave the shopping guide a look. The shopping guide nodded and took out the box with the jade bracelet. She said, "You can have a look at it here." Gerald ignored what she said. He took over the box casually. Elliot's face changed slightly. He said, "Be careful. Don't break it. If it's broken, I'm afraid that you won't be able to pay for the damage even with all of your money." "I'll take it." At this time, Gerald suddenly smiled at him. Elliot was stunned and looked at Gerald in shock. He thought he had misheard. "I said I'll take it," Gerald spoke again. Elliot swallowed and said, "Gerald, this is priced at $200,000. Audrey also frowned. She had done a background check on Gerald. Before Gerald came to work in her company, he had only worked at the construction site. Where did he get $200,000? "I know." Gerald looked at Elliot and said, "But I don't have so much cash, so can I pay by credit card?" Elliot frowned and said, "Dude, don't make fun of me. This jade bracelet will cost you $200,000. Can you really afford it?" Gerald smiled slightly. He took out a card from his pocket and handed it to Elliot as he said, "Here you are." Elliot was suspicious. However, when he saw the blue credit card, he was shocked. Beside him, Audrey's beautiful eyes also suddenly widened. "Diamond card. It's the diamond card of New Bank. How can you have it?" Elliot looked at Gerald in shock. Beside him, Audrey also looked at Gerald in shock. Even her father was not qualified to get the diamond card of New Bank. In an instant, Audrey figured out many things. Why did Gerald get together with Kiera? Why did Kiera let Gerald pretend to be her boyfriend? Logically speaking, as a man who used to work at the construction site, Gerald shouldn't be at the same level as Kiera. Similarly, Audrey also figured out why her father would be so obedient to Gerald in front of him, even though she still didn't know how Gerald saved her father. There were only 9 diamond cards issued in the world, and the diamond card was also a symbol of status. Facing their shocked looks, Gerald calmly touched his nose, looked at Elliot, and asked, "Well, are you still going to sell the bracelet to me? Then, are you selling this stuff or not?" Gerald asked after a dry cough. This question quickly pulled both Audrey and Elliot back to reality. Elliot said with a trembling voice, "Yes, yes, yes." Elliot was still in astonishment. He wondered why one schoolie here had a diamond card from New Bank. Elliot was a client of New Bank too, but his card was a silver one. This was the first time Elliot saw a diamond card in reality. Before this, he had seen it in the photos of New Bank. Elliot quickly took the bank card, handed it to a saleswoman next to him, and said, "Quick, POS terminal." His hands trembled slightly. The beautiful saleswoman did not know what this bank card meant. Given her walk of life, she had no connection with New Bank. At most, she had heard that New Bank was a place that only served the rich. The saleswoman brought a POS terminal over, so Gerald swiped his card successfully. The transaction was completed. Gerald closed the box, which had little decoration, and then a smile appeared on his face. Gerald looked at Audrey and said, "Do you want to buy anything else? Should we go?" Audrey nodded mechanically. She was still in shock caused by the fact that Gerald had a diamond card. Audrey swallowed and asked, "Why do you have a diamond card from New Bank?" Gerald scratched his head and said, "I got this from my ancestors. It has been passed down for more than 30 generations, and I just got it. Get lost." Audrey glared at Gerald and said, "Tell me, where did you get it?" "Secret." Gerald smiled mysteriously at Audrey. Frustrated, Audrey wanted to beat Gerald to death. However, she could do nothing since Gerald refused to breathe a word of his secret. Audrey found Gerald more mysterious than before. Gerald said, "Let's go." Audrey nodded. Elliot said, "By the way, be careful. Donovan is powerful in Los Angeles and may be considered one of the most powerful people here. Gerald, you just mucked his plan up, and he will probably pay a big sum of money as compensation. Now, the reputation of Treasure Store is completely ruined. Given his personality, he will seek revenge for sure. Also, he is hot-tempered. He will probably start his revenge the moment you leave my shop," Elliot said and then glanced at ads by Pub Future. Audrey with concern. "What do you think if I send my men to escort you home?" "I think he doesn't have the guts to mess with my men." Before Gerald opened his mouth, Audrey said with a sneer, "I dare him to lay a finger on me. I will make him go bankrupt." Audrey was confident because her father was the richest man in Los Angeles and had a good relationship with Gideon. In Los Angeles, she could achieve this goal. As for Gerald, he didn't take this threat seriously. Hearing Audrey, Elliot smiled and said, "You are right. He doesn't dare to hurt you. In short, be careful." Gerald nodded. Gerald and Audrey swaggered out of the shop. Donovan was sitting in Treasure Store. He saw Gerald come out and sneered. "Gerald, that brat ruined my plan. I will teach him a lesson." "Boss." Besides Donovan, a man said. "Look at the woman next to him. Is she Bradley's daughter, Audrey?" Donovan looked at Audrey and frowned. "Yes. Trail them. Beat Gerald to death after they separate from each other and then bring him to me." The man nodded and said, "Got you." Donovan exhaled deeply. He took out a cigarette and lit it. Then he narrowed his eyes and looked through the glass window at Gerald and Audrey, who were far away. There was a cold light in his eyes. This was a modified garage in Los Angeles. As usual, Fletcher held a gathering with his rich friends and a group of beautiful women in the garage. Henley was there too. He was taking liberties with a beautiful woman in his arms with a smile on his face. The beautiful woman leaned over and said, "Come, Henley, have some wine. You have caressed me for the whole morning. Ha ha ha." There was a burst of laughter echoing in the garage. Fletcher smiled at Henley and said, "Henley, I will take you to one place tonight. I promise that you won't want to go home." Henley's eyes lit up slightly. Then, Henley shook his head and said, "No, thanks. I have an appointment tonight. You know Kiera from New Bank, don't you? She was at university with Doreen and me. Apart from traveling, we are here to send her our wedding invitation and attend her birthday party." "Will Kiera have a birthday party today?" Matthew looked happy but then said with disappointment, "Alas, she didn't invite me to her party. You will have to be thick-skinned to chase after a girl. She didn't invite you, but you can go yourself. You have hung around with me for a long time, but why didn't you improve at all?" Fletcher looked at Matthew with disdain. Matthew pursed his lips and said, "Mr. McHale, come on, you haven't won Audrey over after such a long time." To make things worse, both girls got Gerald as their shield. Hearing this, Fletcher could not help but cover the scar on his head, and a hint of anger flashed across his face. Right then, his mobile phone rang. Fletcher checked his phone, silenced the crowd with one gesture, and then answered the call. "Hello, Dad, what's the matter?" On the other end of the line, a middle-aged male voice sounded with endless exhaustion. "Hello, Fletcher, you are in your garage, aren't you?" Fletcher became alert. Before he denied it, his father said, "Sell your garage and ask a trusted friend to keep all the money for you for the time being. Later, you can continue your good life with that sum of money for a period." Fletcher became aghast. Dad, what happened? We may be doomed. On the other end of the line, the caller sounded frustrated. Hearing this, Fletcher shivered violently and then fell on the sofa as if he had been struck by lightning. Gerald and Audrey dined at the most famous restaurant in all Antiques. This restaurant had a good reputation in all Antiques, but its dishes were far inferior to that of the Marriott Hotel. During lunch, Audrey kept asking Gerald why he had a diamond card. Gerald insisted that it was his secret. This girl is nosy, Gerald thought. Since Gerald refused to share his secret, Audrey got mad at last and stopped talking to him. Gerald enjoyed this moment of silence. Right then, he received a message from Valerie. In less than 3 days, the McHale family will go bankrupt. It was a short sentence. A sneer appeared on Gerald's face. Putting away his phone, Gerald looked at the angry Audrey and said, "Are we going back to the company after lunch?" Audrey shot an angry glance at Gerald and said nothing. Gerald didn't get mad and followed Audrey. After lunch, Audrey paid the bill and led Gerald out of all Antiques. Gerald noticed that someone was trailing him. They do nothing. Probably that they don't dare to mess with Audrey. Gerald thought. Gerald didn't pay much attention to his tail. Gerald and Audrey drove out of all Antiques. Audrey didn't go back to work. She took Gerald to a shopping mall. After a casual walk in the mall, Audrey went to watch a movie. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Gerald and Audrey came out of the mall and drove to Marriott Hotel for Kira's birthday party. Kira's birthday party was held in a banquet hall on the 3rd floor of the Marriott Hotel. When Gerald and Audrey arrived, it was already 5:30. Kira was standing at the door in a long dress and looked gloomy. Kira put on a smiling face at the sight of Gerald and Audrey. She said, "You finally came." Audrey ran over and said, "Kira, are you in a bad mood? You didn't look good just now." Kira sighed and then said, "Philip and Matthew came uninvited." Hearing this, Audrey sneered and said, "I will not let them off if they dare to cause trouble at your banquet." Gerald rubbed his nose. From the conversation and Matthew wanting to pursue Kira, Gerald could tell that the son of the president of new bank branch in Los Angeles was also pursuing Kira. Audrey looked at Gerald and said, "By the way, you asked Gerald to pretend to be your boyfriend last time. Let him pretend to be. This time." Kira pouted and looked at Gerald. Gerald was so speechless. These two women were so annoying. Audrey had just used him as a shield. Matthew and the others knew this. Now they wanted Gerald to pretend to be Kira's boyfriend. Matthew and the others wouldn't believe it. Kira looked at Gerald. Gerald shrugged and said, "I'm fine. But I'm between you. They won't believe me." Kira smiled bitterly and said, "That's true. They probably won't believe you. Forget it. Let's not bother about it for now. Go in and take a seat. Doreen and Henley have arrived." Gerald was stunned. "You know Doreen and Henley?" Kira nodded. "Doreen, Henley, and I are university classmates. But speaking of which, Doreen looked down on Henley when we were in university. I didn't like Henley's personality. I didn't expect that they would end up together." Gerald chuckled and thought, "They're together. That's not gonna happen." Gerald looked at Kira. He did not expect that Kira would also graduate from California State University in Sacramento. As one of the top universities in the country, it was understandable that she could work at New Bank. After a few words, Audrey and Gerald walked into the banquet hall. There were many people there. This banquet hall was not large. There were only 4 round tables. There were many people at the table. These people were not old. They were supposed to be Kira's friends and colleagues. As for the older generation, Kira would probably choose to celebrate with them alone. Audrey looked around and quickly saw Doreen and the others. Then she walked over with Gerald and sat down. Seeing Gerald, Henley frowned and said, "Can you sit at another table? Sitting with you will disgrace us." On the table, apart from Henley, Doreen, and Penny, there were Hazel and a few people that Gerald did not know. Penny curled her lips and said, "That's right. Do you know Kira? How do you have the nerve to come here to eat?" Gerald frowned. Audrey explained, "Penny, Kira invited Gerald over. Ads by Pub Future." What Audrey said stunned them. Henley said, "Whatever. There are some empty seats over there. Go find a seat." After Audrey sits down, there is only one seat left for Kira. "You are not qualified to sit with us." Doreen had an indifferent expression. She did not speak for Gerald. Audrey looked awkwardly at Gerald. Gerald rubbed his nose, not bothering to talk nonsense with Henley. Gerald looked around and saw Matthew. He smiled slightly, walked to Matthew's table, and sat down. When Matthew saw Gerald walk over, his body instinctively shrank. Matthew remembered the scene of Gerald beating up Fletcher that day. At the stable, there was a mix of men and women. When they saw Gerald, they all had fake smiles. A dark-skinned man, who was not tall and wore slightly fancy clothes, asked, "Who is he?" Matthew thought of something, and his expression changed slightly. "This is Gerald Kenneth." That man's eyelids twitched slightly. Then he looked at Gerald and said, "Gerald, let me introduce someone to you. This is Thay, son of the president of New Bank, Philip Nielsen." Gerald's expression changed slightly. He looked at Philip, who then sneered, "Ah. You are Gerald. I heard that you pretended to be Kira's boyfriend, and then pretended to be Audrey's boyfriend. You provoked Fletcher and managed to survive until now. You are lucky." Beside him, Matthew's mouth twitched, but he did not say anything. Obviously, Fletcher did not let this matter spread. After all, this was a great humiliation for him. Gerald smiled and said, "Sort of." Philip laughed and said, "How much is it for you to pretend to be their boyfriend? I heard that you were a laborer before. How could Kira and Audrey hire someone like you? They should get someone better." The others on the table laughed. Matthew also revealed a hint of a sinister smile. Everyone seemed to have arrived. A waiter began to serve the dishes. Kira walked into the banquet hall leisurely. She smiled sweetly and said, "Thank you for coming to my birthday banquet today. Enjoy yourselves. I ordered a room at Glory Club. After eating, let's continue to play." While Kira was talking, a girl next to her took out a box and said, "Kira, happy birthday. This is the gift I prepared for you, a pair of earrings." The girl opened the delicate box, revealing a pair of beautiful ear studs. "Thank you, dear." Kira smiled sweetly at her. Kira then took the box and handed it to a waiter beside her. Obviously, Kira had expected that many people would give her gifts. As expected, one gift box after another began to appear. These gifts might not be valuable, but they were not cheap. At the very least, they were worth over $160. After most of the people were done, Audrey stood up with a smile. She walked over to Kira with a gift box, opened it, and said, "This is a piece of blue and white porcelain. Kira, I know that you like to collect antiques. So, I bought it in all antiques." Kira's eyes lit up slightly. She said, "Thank you, Audrey. I like it very much." Henley smiled and said, "The blue and white porcelain is not bad. Its value is probably around $350,000. After Henley finished, there was a sound of gasping in astonishment in the surroundings. On Gerald's table, Matthew frowned. He also prepared a gift, and it could be considered expensive. He thought that it would be the best gift tonight, but compared with the blue and white porcelain that Audrey brought out, Matthew's gift would probably not be the best. Henley smiled slightly and said, "We all know that Kira is from the dance department of California State University in Sacramento. She dances very well. Doreen and I did not know what to buy for you. Coincidentally, before we left for Los Angeles, we saw a pair of crystal dance shoes at an exhibition." Henley took out a gift box and opened it. In an instant, the light shone down, and the crystal shoes flashed with dazzling light. It was beautiful. Kira's expression changed slightly as she said, "This is too expensive. I can't accept it." "It's not expensive." Henley chuckled and said, "It's just $130,000. It's nothing much." The people beside Henley wanted to curse out loud. His words sounded so disgusting. Doreen smiled. "Kira, accept it. This is our kind intention." Kira was stunned for a moment and then nodded. "All right, thank you." Doreen smiled slightly. Beside Gerald, Matthew's expression immediately became ugly. The gift Matthew prepared was the same as Audrey's, about $50,000. But it was outdone by Henley's gift. Matthew shrank his neck and was too embarrassed to take his gift out. Next to Matthew, Philip looked at him with disdain. Then, Philip slowly got up and took out a car key from his pocket. "I thought for a long time and didn't know what to give you. I saw that your car seemed quite ordinary, so I bought you a Porsche. I hope you will like it. Beside him, Matthew's face was bitter. The price of Porsche might not be lower than that of the crystal shoes. Philip picked up a bunch of flowers from under the table and walked up to Kiera. He held the flowers in one hand and the car keys in the other. Philip then came up to Kiera and knelt on one knee, saying, "Kiera, be my girlfriend." Kiera's expression changed slightly. She looked around and then shook her head. "No, I have a boyfriend. We all know that your boyfriend is fake." Philip looked at Gerald. Suddenly, he rolled his eyes and asked, "By the way, Gerald, you disguise yourself as Kiera's boyfriend, and you also come to her birthday banquet today. I wonder what gift you have prepared." As soon as Philip finished speaking, almost everyone looked at Gerald. Henley's face revealed a faintly mocking smile. Gerald was named in public, so everyone looked at him. Henley sat aside and said with a sneer, "I wonder how Gerald will deal with it. Even if he prepared a gift, it is probably very shabby. Now, with my crystal shoes in the Porsche, if Gerald dares to take his gift out, he will be embarrassed." Doreen frowned, but Audrey had a smile. Kiera looked at Gerald. Somehow, Kiera had some expectations. Kiera knew about Gerald's situation. No matter what Gerald prepared for her, even if it was worth just a cent, she would feel happy. This feeling was strange. Gerald touched his nose. Under everyone's surprised gazes, he stood up and took out the box that he had prepared. He handed it to Kiera and said, "I heard Audrey say that you like antiques today. I picked something from All Antiques." With her, Gerald did not open the box and just handed it to Kiera. Kiera was slightly happy, ready to reach out to take it. Philip, who was kneeling on one knee, stared at Kiera. He saw the change in Kiera's expression. A wave of anger suddenly rose inside him. "I will humiliate Gerald." Philip was furious. Before Kiera reached out to take the box, Philip suddenly got up and grabbed the box. He looked at Gerald and said, "Wow, I want to see what it is." As Philip spoke, he opened the box, revealing a jade bracelet inside. "Wow, I heard that before you pretended to be Kiera's boyfriend, you were a laborer." Philip looked at Gerald and said, "This bracelet was bought from a stall in All Antiques, right? The box is quite exquisite. I wonder how much money you spent. Let me tell you, the things in the stalls in All Antiques are fake. This bracelet is probably just worth a few dollars. You have been fooled." "Ha." Beside him, Henley chimed in with Philip, "Gerald, your gift is so precious." Everyone could tell that Henley was satirizing, and the surrounding people burst into laughter. Gerald touched his nose and did not care about their laughter. He just calmly took the box from Philip and handed it to Kiera. Ads by Pub Future. Kiera smiled sweetly at Gerald and said, "Thank you. As long as you give me something, whether it is expensive or cheap, I will be very happy." Kiera's voice sounded a bit flirtatious. For the men here who had a good impression of Kiera, it was a blow. Even though Gerald pretended to be Kiera's boyfriend before, after Kiera said that, those men felt jealous. When Doreen heard this, her eyes narrowed slightly. She looked at Gerald and Kiera. A trace of emotion flashed through her eyes, but then it disappeared, and Doreen regained a trace of calmness. Hazel frowned and pursed her lips. No one knew what she was thinking. Henley chuckled. He looked at Gerald and said, "Gerald, Kiera has said so. It will not be right to give her such a cheap thing." "That's right. Why don't you help Kiera pay for this meal?" Philip raised his head, looked at Gerald, and said with a sinister smile, "The price of this meal at the Marriott Hotel was not low. There were 40 people there. Even if it was the lowest consumption, it would at least cost thousands of dollars. Moreover, the food that Kiera ordered was not low in quality. This was not something that Gerald could afford." "I agree," Matthew said with a sneer. Henley looked at Gerald with a faint smile and said, "Gerald, I think what they said makes sense. After all, the thing you give is too cheap." "Henley." Audrey seemed to be unable to bear it any longer. She frowned and said, "This birthday gift should not be valued by money. It's the thought that counts. Moreover, Gerald's bracelet is not cheap." "Yes, it is not cheap for Gerald. Indeed, he does not have much money." "I'm not thoughtful enough," Henley hurriedly said. It is difficult for him to spend tens of dollars to buy a bracelet from the stall in All Antiques. Audrey said with a frown, this bracelet cost Gerald $200,000. What? In an instant, the hall was in an uproar. Neither Henley's gift nor Philip's car was worth over $160,000. Now, Audrey said that Gerald spent $200,000 on this bracelet. This was completely unexpected. The hall fell into silence in an instant, including Kiera. Her hand that was holding the box trembled slightly. Kiera did not expect that this bracelet would be so expensive. Others did not know Gerald. They thought that Gerald was just a poor person. However, as the manager who received Gerald, Kiera knew very well that Gerald was a diamond card user. Kiera looked at Gerald. Gerald still had that indifferent smile on his face. Henley smiled. Audrey, I know that Gerald is your assistant. You don't want to embarrass him, but there is no need to lie. How could he take out $200,000? Were you kidding? Why would I lie to you? Audrey said. We bought it from Elliot in All Antiques. If you don't believe it, you can ask him. When Audrey finished, everyone fell silent. In fact, when Audrey stood up to speak, everyone believed her. Audrey's father, Bradley, was the richest man in Los Angeles. What Audrey said was trustworthy. Philip and Henley were both stunned. They didn't expect the bracelet that Gerald took out to be so valuable. Gerald didn't mention it before, but Audrey spoke it out. Those men wanted to humiliate Gerald, but they happened to allow Gerald to take the limelight. Those men thought the gifts they prepared were the best. In comparison, their gifts were overshadowed. Henley glanced at Gerald and then looked at the serious Audrey. He said in a low voice, how did he get so much money? Gerald ignored Henley's words. He looked at Kiera with a smile and said, don't worry about this. You helped me a lot before. This is what I should do. This is too expensive. Kiera shook her head. Gerald smiled, it's fine. Happy birthday. Kiera clenched her teeth and gazed at Gerald. Then, she put the box away and felt a little sweet. Philip's expression was gloomy. Then, he gritted his teeth and knelt on the ground again. He held the car key and flowers and said, Kiera, be my girlfriend. Kiera pondered for a moment before saying, no, I can't accept your gift. It will be bad if your father finds it out. Philip was stunned, while the others laughed. Kiera bypassed Philip and said to everyone, thank you everyone for your kind intentions. Today is the happiest birthday I have ever had. Let's start eating. Philip was a little embarrassed. He stood up with a gloomy face, walked to the seat next to him, and sat down. He looked at Gerald with resentment. Beside him, Matthew flinched, not daring to take out his gift. The people at the table quietly looked at Gerald and discussed in low voices. Gerald sat down calmly, with a faint smile on his face. He began to eat heartily. Philip saw Gerald's indifferent face. He felt that Gerald was acting in front of him. When Philip thought of what Kiera said just now, Philip became angry. After a moment, Philip seemed to have thought of something. A sinister look flashed in his eyes, and he walked up to Matthew. Philip patted Matthew on the shoulder, indicating that Matthew should go out with him. Gerald saw Philip's movement, but he did not care. He curled his lips in disdain.